everyone, and welcome back to a special edition of Identity Insights by Indicio. I'm your host, Tim Spring, and this week we have a few team members on site at Internet Identity Workshop. So we'll be bringing you some live coverage from the day's events. Today, I'm joined by Indicio Senior Software Engineer Colton Wolkins. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, Colton. Would you mind giving us a brief introduction about yourself?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm Colton Wolkins. I work for Indicio, and I am also the co-chair of the DIDCOM users group over at the DIF. And so I do a bunch of work related to DIDCOM in my duties.
All right, sounds good. And for those unfamiliar with the event, could you tell us a little bit about IIW? What makes it unique, among identity events?
So a lot of conferences will have scheduled sessions, so you'll know like the day before what you're going to and things like that. And with IIW, the difference here is that the topics for the discussions for each session is chosen the day of the morning of the event. So for Tuesday, morning of Tuesday, Wednesday, morning of Wednesday, et cetera, et cetera. And it is whoever goes to which sessions being talked about, it's all up to the people.
All right, sounds good. So jumping into that then, what sessions stuck out to you today? What were some of the interesting topics that people were talking about?
So some of the sessions that stuck out to me today, there was one talking about simplifying SSI technology, where they were talking about how diving into self-sovereign identity, there is a lot that's there per se. Everything's the kitchen sink. And diving in as a new developer is a very complicated task because there's just too much there, not enough documentation. And in some cases, in order to figure out how something works, you have to talk to the people who wrote it. Another talk that I went to that I thought was pretty fun was it was an introduction of a 101 session on FIDO technology. And for those who don't know what FIDO is, that's the same thing as like using a YubiKey to log into your computer, or using like Windows Hello facial recognition to sign in as your multi-factor authentication method.
All right, very cool. So I understand that you were also speaking today and held your own session. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you were talking about?
Absolutely. So today, what I talked about was I did a 101 session myself, talking about DIDCOM itself, trying to break the illusion that DIDCOM is a complicated thing to get into. Because as I mentioned with the Simplify SSI, everyone feels like everything's the kitchen sink, you get everything. But DIDCOM is really much more concise in its nature, and therefore it's easier to grasp, easier to understand, easier to use and build libraries off
of. Okay. So I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about, how do you get into DIDCOM then, if you were to pitch it to anyone watching this?
So kind of my first recommendation, it's not really a end user kind of tool. It's more of a developer tool, developer like demo. But there's a demo at demo.didcom.org, which allows you can open up two browser tabs, copy the did from one, post it in another, and then have a peer-to-peer, completely encrypted communication between both those browser tabs. It can be on different computers, mobile device, whatever. And you can experiment with and see how it works. And one of the benefits of that is you can also see the messages that are being sent back and forth, which allows you to understand that it's not a lot of complicated stuff. Everything is just these small little things being sent back and forth, and it's an extensible protocol.
So I understand it's your first time at IIW. Could you tell us a little bit about, your experience as someone walking in kind of fresh and new to the scene?
So since this is my first time, I got to say that today, at least, is a day of many firsts for me. It is my first time at a unconference like this, where The sessions aren't determined beforehand. It's my first day presenting. I was also one of the first presentations off the block, so I had no experience. But one of the interesting things about it is going to IIW. There are so many different conversations that happen, whether it's in the halls, the different sessions, and they've even said at the start of the convention that if you find something that's interesting, go. If you're sitting somewhere like you're in a talk session that's boring, leave and go to find something that's interesting, because there's just so much to talk about, so many things that are interesting. And because it's a conference of a bunch of people working on the future, there's a lot of exciting new things.
All right, nice. Were there any topics that maybe came up that you think might be having a full session on later in the week that you'd be interested in learning a bit more about?
So during the FIDO discussion, the FIDO session that I went to, I had asked the question, because a lot of the sessions are talking about verifiable credentials. So I asked the question, like, how do verifiable credentials tie into FIDO, or can they even do so? Because FIDO has all these wonderful, pop-ups in the browser and whatnot. Want to take some of that cake, some of those nice user experience kind of things if we can. And the answer to that question was a bit more complicated. There are some people who are trying to use like FIDO-like technologies with verifiable credentials, but it also sounded like there might be some development and discussion towards having similar APIs, but for verifiable credentials.
Okay, that sounds pretty cool. So obviously, hopefully we'll get to hear about a session on that topic maybe tomorrow or Thursday. I don't mean to take too much of your time, Colton. Really appreciate you talking to us. If you could leave us with one thought, which is, if someone was, debating going to the conference, how has your experience been, and what would you say to them if they were thinking about going and they weren't entirely sure?
So far, my experience going to the convention is there's not enough time. I've only been here one day. There's 3 days of the convention. There's not enough time. So go.
I see. Awesome. Well, yeah, it sounds super exciting and really appreciate you talking to us. I know you've already had a long day, so we'll go ahead and let you go. If you at home are interested in learning a bit more about verifiable credential technology, or just want to keep up to date on the latest identity events, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. We'll continue to bring you some more educational content. And if you have any questions or specific topics, please feel free to leave a comment below and we'll be sure to read and address them. Thanks for watching.